Hey everyone, it's Mr. Wildboy94. I hope you're doing well today. I have a book review for a book that I haven't read in like 10 years. I read it back in high school when I first really started getting into horror, and mainly with horror books. I had already been a horror movie fan and that kind of thing. And this book I read, like I said, about 10 years ago, and I remember kinda hating it a little bit. It had its moments, but for the most part I didn't really like it. And about 2 weeks ago I went on vacation to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and I bought a lot of stuff. I'm gonna do a book haul after this video. But one of the books I read, out of the 3 that I read, I plan on reviewing the other ones in a little bit. Not tonight, or whenever you see this video, but sometime soon over the next couple of days, when I have some time after work at nighttime. This book is a classic, considered by most people to be one of the best, if not the best, haunted house stories of all time, or possession, ghost stories, whatever. This is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Now, as you can see up on the top, there is a Netflix adaptation little ticket thing on the cover. I used to have the exact same cover for this book. It was a slimmer version of this book back in the day from Penguin Classics, and apparently when Netflix put this out, Penguin Classics made a thicker book. I don't know why. So, as you know, it is a Netflix TV show that a lot of people love. I haven't watched that yet. As a matter of fact, the first ever time I knew anything about The Haunting of Hill House was the 1990s movie they used to play all the time on cable. Specifically, I think the Sci-Fi Channel or the AMC Channel, one of the two. I used to watch this movie, I'm not kidding you, at least twice a year, back when I was a kid. That was even far back as like 2003 when my parents were still together. You know what I mean? Like, it was a weird thing as a kid, watching that and relatively enjoying it. It's one of those times in my life I enjoyed things like Halloween Resurrection, for example. However, I've grown up, my tastes have grown up, and I can recognize a piece of trash movie compared to a well-done movie. And what I do want to say is that 1990s film with Owen Wilson and Liam Neeson is absolutely awful. Don't even waste your time watching that adaptation. Watch the original adaptation to movies called The Haunting. This is a phenomenal movie. I have no doubt in my mind, as much as I see clips here and there that look good of the TV show from Netflix, I will bet you that nothing will ever be as good as this, because I think this movie is even the best representation of this story ever produced, easily, even compared to the book. I got this on my honeymoon, by the way, at a great store that I love deeply. The Haunting of Hill House is about 180 pages, and what is this book about? Well, as I kind of hinted at, it's kind of a ghost story. Essentially, you have a young girl named Eleanor, a young girl, woman, whatever, and she happens to live with her sister and her sister's husband and daughter, and they kind of suck. They're really rude, they're really kind of condescending to her, and they treat Eleanor kind of like she's a kid. She doesn't really deserve that. And immediately from the beginning of the book, you kind of feel bad for this character and kind of root for her. Now, she gets an invitation from a Dr. Montague to come out to a place called Hill House. It's a little bit of a drive, quite a few hours away, and she has to basically steal the family car to go do that, even though she had originally put money into this car. It's technically her car, but the sister and her family kind of say, no, it's not really your car. I don't think it's a good idea for you to take our car. You know, they're scumbags. They're absolute scumbags. So this is the thing. Eleanor gets there, she's one of the first to arrive. She meets the 2 housekeepers, who are husband and wife, who refuse to stay past, the afternoon sun going down. And they're weirdos, especially the wife, who, once Eleanor meets her, hears her repeat constantly throughout this book about how she puts dinner out at this time, she cleans up at this time. Repeated, non-stop. By the end of this book, this 180-page book, you will know this woman's entire life and schedule, I promise you. Anyway, Eleanor meets Dr. Montague at some point. She also meets a young lady named Theodora, who is kind of a sassy character, kind of a nice character. She's very funny. I really like Theodora quite a bit. And Dr. Montague I like quite a bit. He's a very kind of classy scientist type of dude who doesn't really know if he believes in ghosts from what I can tell, but he's curious enough that he wants to do an experiment on this Hill House. Now, there's another character in here who's kind of the charming, very thick-jawed fellow named Luke, who apparently is going to be an inheritor at some point when his aunt passes away. He will inherit Hill House itself, and part of the contract Dr. Montague has for this experiment is that he has to have a living or soon-to-be relative, or really a relative in general, who's going to inherit this house, be part of the experiment. What the experiment is, you might wonder. He just kind of wants to see if people like, for example, Eleanor, our main character, who has had some psychic things which are also referenced in Carrie by Stephen King. It's really weird. I read that this time and I was like, What the hell? So, as I read this, I was a little, like, taken off by that. Anyway, with some of her psychic abilities, and possibly Theodora having a little bit of something too, he basically wants to see if they could influence any kind of weird activity in the house, paranormal or otherwise. The house is terrifying looking. It's almost, in my opinion, it should be scarier looking than this house right here on the cover. More rickety, imagine that. More gothic, imagine that. Now that's pretty much our setup for the story, and aside from that, it's kind of plotless. It's kind of just these four people living in the house and kind of observing things, kind of taking notes here and there, communicating. It's kind of a character study, but kind of not. It's a little bit of everything, and I think that's part of the flaw of this particular book. As much as people love it, I'm not the biggest fan of this book. As I said, I think The Haunting, the original black and white movie, is the best representation of this story ever told because of how perfect it is. It's perfected what Shirley Jackson crafted. You know what I mean? Like, it sounds like an insult. I don't really mean it to be that way, because the book itself, for the most part, if you're more of a character person, if you like reading stories in the dark, that's kind of what this book is. Imagine a campfire story that happens to be 180 pages long. That's kind of what this is. Imagine scary stories to tell in the dark expanded to a 180-page novel. That's kind of what you're getting here. However, my biggest complaint, personally, is the writing style. It's not even the events. The ending is a little confusing, a little not so great on the execution, but the big thing for me involving that execution is Shirley Jackson's writing style. I think she's mostly a really great author. I think she has some great writing technique, some great style, some really great ways to execute certain things in the midst of a paragraph. Now, when you get to certain events in this book, like I said, the finale for me is a little bit weird. It's a little bit trying too hard to be smart, and trying too hard in general, which I don't think it really works for me, personally. There were times I had to reread certain sentences, of hers again and again to really understand something that was such an impactful part of the story that was like, it's gone. It was there and then it was gone so quick. Once again, like that. I had to read it like 4 or 5 times to understand that sentence, and that happened numerous times throughout this. It's not that I consider that bad writing, it's just that even for its time in the 50s, 60s, whenever this was released at that time frame, before Shirley Jackson, not too long after this, passed away, it seems to me like it just isn't perfect. It needed another couple of revisions, in my personal opinion. That's just me playing backseat editor while I read books nowadays as a wannabe writer. Then again, take that as advice of a wannabe. It is very 1950s, 60s-esque. It's very short, succinct in the writing style. If that's not for you, you're probably not going to love it. If you don't like very subtle character traits, like with Theodora, she is very sassy. She's very funny. Very, very funny character. Eleanor is kind of mousy. You know, she's kind of the type that is afraid to speak her mind to people, and when she does, she feels guilt over it. She's that type. And I really like pretty much all of these characters. But again, the ending for me is a little bit... It is what it is. It's a little bit weird and a little bit off in a lot of ways. But for the most part, when it comes to Haunting of Hill House, it's a really solid read. It has some good moments to it that I really enjoyed. Excuse me. But I think it just needed a little bit more oomph. You know, but for its time, what this was at its time, it's pretty solid. It's a pretty solid read. You can't really complain about all that much. And it's considered by most, like Dracula, like Frankenstein, to be a classic of some sort. And it's definitely gothic. If you like gothic, atmospheric tales, this has all that for you. If you really prefer that, like a Lovecraft atmosphere-focused type of thing, this is for you, I promise you. Anyway, when it comes to The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, if I had to rate this book on a 5-star basis, I would probably give it a roughly... I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to give it like a 3 out of 5 stars. It's very middle of the road for me just because of the finale. But I think most of it's really solid. It's really entertaining. I like Theodora. She's probably my favorite character in the entire book, even though I like Eleanor a lot. It has really good moments, and it has some genuinely, if you're looking for scares, it has some genuinely scary moments. And again, that's why I hinted earlier about reading it in the dark, or on your Kindle or whatever, with low light. Whatever you're going to do to read this book, read it by candlelight if you could. I promise you there are moments in here, if you're reading it in the right environment, you're going to get scared. Reading this in the woods in Tennessee, on a porch at a cabin, was terrifying. It had some really effective scares in there that I knew about from the movie adaptations to the back 10 years ago when I read the book. Those things even though I knew they were coming, still got to me because of the way they're written, because of Shirley Jackson's style that really, for the most part, is good. Really good sometimes. Anyway, 3 out of 5 stars for me. What are your thoughts on Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this one. Let me know if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. I'd love to hear all that as well. Thank you for watching, guys. God bless you. Goodbye.